I was supposed to be working on closed captions for the next video, but last week I got a free pizza because of something that was in the news. And so today we're doing something a little bit different. Now, before we start, it's really important for you to bear in mind that I am not a lawyer and I don't know anything about economics. So GameStop is apparently a high street video game retailer. I say apparently because I don't play video games. And you can imagine that in the age of the internet, a bricks and mortar seller of electronic products was experiencing some financial difficulties. And then, of course, anybody with any sense stopped visiting the high street because of, well, a plague. So GameStop's future looked decidedly uncertain. And some speculators and hedge funds decided to bet against it. They took what is called a short position. This is essentially borrowing a share and then selling it. At some point, you have to return the share, which means buying it back. If the share price goes down, you make money. If it goes up, you lose money. Shorting is not a way to win friends. You are literally betting on people losing their jobs. This is where Reddit forums came in. It is claimed that small investors on internet forums spotted that large funds had overcommitted themselves to the short position, and that they then began to buy GameStop stock, pushing the price up and squeezing the people who had short positions. Now, in principle, this is normal market activity. One group thinks the price will go down, one thinks it will go up. They're betting against each other. But the suggestion was soon made that the two groups were not merely betting on what they thought would happen, they were actively trying to manipulate the prices. And the market became very unstable, with accusations of manipulation, shadowy figures, fraud, and inappropriate pressure thrown at the hedge funds, the Reddit users, and any brokers unfortunate enough to be caught in the middle. So, did anyone do anything wrong? And is anyone going to jail? Okay, I literally just told you that I don't know anything about economics, so I'm wildly unqualified to answer this question. But I think there is an interesting historical perspective on this. And some years ago, I wrote a book. It's called Playing with Money. It's about the way money is represented in 20th century board games, going right the way back to the origin of modern board games with Elizabeth Maggie in 1903. That's a sound numismatic subject, the physical representation of money. So in that book, I made an argument that the way in which we regulate and understand the stock market is actually more to do with a sense that somebody is doing something wrong than it is to do with technical, legal, or economic issues. In other words, there's a really strong element of morality in the way that the stock market is regulated. And that's reflected in the board games. So board games are, with one notable exception, overwhelmingly negative portrayals of the stock market. And they kind of come in waves across the 20th century. So at the beginning of the 20th century, they portray traders as gamblers. And then they go on to portraying them as cheating. And then finally, they go on to portray them as reckless and responsible for crashes that are economically damaging. But before I come back to that main argument and how it applies here, let's rewind a little bit and talk about how trading on stock markets was justified as stock markets developed. Stocks and shares began in the 17th century, which is very recent. They are not very old at all. As a way of funding trade voyages, companies like the VOC or the EIC initially sold shares in a particular voyage and eventually in the company itself. This created the first joint stock companies. And joint stock companies have huge legal advantages for purely practical reasons. So how was this advantage justified? Well, it was justified by the concept of public good. The joint stock arrangement made it possible to raise private capital for activities that would otherwise be beyond the resources of any individual. And you can make a historical economic argument that that was true. China had begun long-distance trade voyages centuries before, but those were state-funded and they never developed into a sustainable trade. Once you had stock, people wanted to sell it. And therefore you got stock markets. The first was in Amsterdam for the Dutch East India Company, and for a long time most others were informal affairs. In London, people just met in coffee shops. Now, remember, originally you were supposed to keep the stock which guaranteed a share in the profits. So how do you justify buying and selling it? Well, basically by an extension of the public good argument. The investors were more likely to buy shares and thus raise capital for the activities that wouldn't otherwise be possible if they knew they could liquidate those assets later without having to wait to the completion of whatever activity was involved. However, stock markets lead to speculation. People buy and sell shares not with the intention of funding the company or sharing in its profits, but rather with making money directly from the buying and selling. And these can become very elaborate, trades like shorts. So how do you justify speculation? It doesn't raise any capital for the company. It doesn't perform a public good. Two justifications have developed over the last few centuries to justify what is frequently seen as gambling. In fact, what was legally classified in a lot of the United States as gambling until the 20th century. The first is that speculators create ready customers for those people who want to dispose of their shares, who, remember, are more likely to invest because they know that they can get rid of the share later. And the second, which has often been deployed to defend practices such as shorting, where people are not merely buying or selling, but making promises to buy or sell in the future in order to create bets on the performance of companies, is that they provide a wisdom of crowds effect. All of the independent investors act to provide a barometer on the company's value, which helps to give accurate prices, which gives confidence for investors in what a fair price is, which makes them more likely to invest, which creates the capital, which acts as the public good. And I did mention that there was one board game about stock markets which doesn't present a negative picture of them, and ironically one of the few successful stock market games, Francis Tresham's 1829. In 1829, players speculate, manipulate markets, cheat, and otherwise behave terribly towards each other as they try to win. But at the end of the game, the previously empty map of England has a fully functioning rail network. And that argument that private vices can lead to public virtues has frequently been deployed to defend more unpalatable elements of the stock market. Doing so is by definition an admission that morality, not economics or law, are the factors we really care about. Back to the book I wrote, this one here, and this isn't a plug for the book. I don't actually get any royalties on this, so if you are interested, go and buy yourself a copy. I think they're available on Amazon, but I'm not plugging it. In order to write that, I spent quite a bit of time reading interviews kept by an oral history project at the Security and Exchanges Commission. The SEC was set up in response to the 1929 Wall Street crash, and it regulates and enforces in regard to US stock markets. I was looking specifically at insider trading, which is different to the market manipulation that people are suggesting has happened in the GameStop case. But in doing so, I made what I feel is a fairly compelling argument. That essentially whether or not you were punished had very little to do with the law or the economic effects of what you did. Essentially, in the 1950s, if you engaged in insider trading, you would not be punished. In the 1970s, if you engaged in insider trading, you would at the very least be forced to give up any profits you made, and you might receive punishment on top of that. The law did not change in between. And if you go and read the economic literature, you'll find lots of economists arguing that there's no negative impact from insider trading. In fact, a lot of economists, there's a whole bunch of them arguing that there's actually positive benefits from insider trading. Some of us might be inclined to question the integrity of the academics making that argument, but that argument is widely made. So that change from the 1950s to the 1970s couldn't be about law, and it couldn't be about economics. Though, when you read the interviews, people who worked at the SEC in that period frequently framed their understanding in legal or economic terms. But if you get down to it and you really read between the lines of what they're saying, what you realise is that there's a generational shift, and that shift is about morality. Staff at the SEC came to view insider trading as cheating, as morally wrong. And it didn't matter what the law said because they were going to find a way to punish it. And it didn't matter whether it was a positive or negative in economic terms, because as far as they were concerned, it was wrong, and therefore it deserved to be punished. The SEC have issued a statement with regard to the GameStop trading, and while there is no question that they will frame any action they take in terms of law and economics, the fact that they promise to maintain fair, orderly and efficient markets with fairness right up there at the front suggests that their response to this event will depend, as it historically has in other cases, more on a subjective evaluation of morality than on any technical, legal or rational economic consideration. So, I'm looking forward, as I'm sure you are and haven't got in this video, to hearing interesting accounts by commentators who actually know something about the law or economics. And I'm sure that they will be fascinating and interesting and informative when they come. But I also think that those people will miss an important historical point, which is that far more often this is about a perception of morality than it is about technical, legal or economic details. And I think that will ultimately determine if somebody gets punished in the GameStop case. Is there a collective sense that somebody did something that's morally reprehensible? If people do develop a collective sense that somebody did something that's morally wrong or bad, then a historical perspective suggests then, and only then, will they be punished for their involvement. Thank you for listening.